Music Talk. Exploring the past, present, and future of music. I'm Alex Cosper with Sam Kadura. And today, a special guest, San Diego radio legend.
What? Listen, Sam's always the special guest.
He's the guy running the board, and he's always kind of...
He's the guy that can turn the mic off.
He's the guy that, can get rid of...
He can get rid of all... This is a really good studio and location. Actually, you have a view.
Thank you. Michael, Hooligan, Halloran. Woo! Thanks for joining us today.
I'm very pleased to be here. Thank you for inviting me. I know this was last minute. I'm filling in for another friend of ours who couldn't be here today.
Another San Diego friend.
Correct.
A radio friend.
So tell me, obviously, there's rock bands waiting in the hallway to come into the interview as well. What else do you guys do around here besides have fun?
Well, it's a 24-hour streaming podcast station. And, it's something that, as you can see, is almost set up like what we know as a terrestrial radio station. We're in a conference room on mics. Sam's in the control room on the board. And this is just like my high school radio station, to be honest.
Did your high school station have a tiny transmitter, though?
It was a 1 watt. Was it 1 watt?
It was about a watt, something like that.
It got to the parking lot.
Yeah, that's all you need. Yeah. This one gets way past. This one gets around the world.
That's true.
Due to the World Wide Web.
Yeah, isn't that what WS Radio stands for? Like, besides weed smoking radio, isn't it like World
Syndicate
Streaming Radio, something like that?
Something like that, yeah.
Yeah, you could call it that if you wanted.
It's the Syndicate, I see.
But this station we're on, WSRadio.com, is owned by Wade Taylor, who also goes by, we'll talk about that. He has another name, too, we'll talk about later. But Wade kind of inherited this whole operation from an earlier owner.
Well, he purchased it, but...
He purchased it,
right.
Okay, so he owns it. And it's got programming 24 hours a day. And here we are live at this time slot.
That's hard to do. Programming 24 hours a day is really unbelievably hard to do.
Right, even for
regular radio.
Yeah.
Most regular radio stations now have people that are not there at night. They're all on tape.
Right. And that's funny because we probably both started out overnight, right? I did, for sure.
I started off super late nights, 1 a.m. to 3 a.m., which is, I'll tell you a quick story. Yesterday, jumped in an Uber to go down and see this band at the House of Blues called Glorious Sons, and the opening act is JJ. What is JJ's? JJ Wild. They're both from Kingston, Ontario. Wonderful, wonderful artists. And as I jumped in the Uber with my crutches, the guy had on a local station here in San Diego, and it was Brian Schock was doing a back sell. And I thought, oh, my God, that's so weird. I just saw pictures of him on Instagram. He was up at Breckenridge up in Colorado. And Brian's been in radio for thousands of years.
Done lots of markets.
And I suddenly was like, this is really weird. So I text him and I go, you just did a back sell on whatever station it was, 98.1 here in San Diego, Sunny. And he goes, no, I'm here. And I'm like, I just saw you at you're in Breckenridge, and your last photo was like 24 hours ago. He goes, yeah, I flew down. He said, so yes, he was in Breckenridge, flew down, and he was actually on the radio. And I thought he was voice tracked because the miracle of voice tracking is you can do it pretty much from anywhere.
Right. Isn't that what Kevin and Bean do? Like
Kevin is in San Diego. Bean, well, he's retiring soon, but he's in like Whidbey Island up in Seattle.
Yeah.
But apparently he wants to move to England. By the way, thanks for making my voice sound really amazing. Did you EQ this? Wow, that's...
Yeah, suddenly your voices grew.
Yeah, I sound way better like this. But it was really weird to find out he's retiring. He wants to move to England. It's like, why would you want to move to England? Why don't you just podcast or stream on some station over there? It's like,
Let me guess, he hates Trump.
I don't know. I mean, if you lived on Whidbey Island and you're in the Pacific Northwest, I would imagine that would probably hold true.
Okay.
It seems like everybody I should say everybody on the West Coast. Most of the people on the West Coast have a problem with that guy. But,
that guy.
I don't. I don't have a problem with him at all. He's just making us realize how important it is to actively participate in not just politics, but in what civics used to be. I was watching Bill Maher last night, what civics used to be in this country. And
which was civilized.
Exactly. But the thing was, I don't know if you know this about me. I grew up from 70 to 76 in England. I was 11 when I arrived
in
there.
Our last interview, which is on playlistresearch.com. If you click interviews, you'll find my interview with Mike Halloran from a few years
So
back.
the weird thing for me is I didn't know anything about my country that I was from. I didn't know anything about the United States of America when I was 11 years old until I went to school in England. I had 12-year-olds asking me why we were in Vietnam. Now, imagine you're 11 years old, you're sitting there and somebody goes, "Why, Yank?" Because my nickname's Yank. Why are you in Vietnam? And I'm like, I'm not in Vietnam. You Yanks are in Vietnam. What are you doing there? And a 12-year-old shouldn't be able to ask those questions, but they were.
Right.
And it forced me into, getting a subscription to, magazines, even though they came 4 weeks late. I would try to keep up with politics and stuff. And that's what kind of drove my political, whatever you want to call it, my political ambitions, even though it's really not an ambition, because I was suddenly interested in why America does certain things, because until you remove yourself from the country, you don't really know. And most people I know have lived here all of their lives and have not experienced why the rest of the world does things that they do, and why a lot of people, why they want to come to America. Why do foreigners want to come here? Because it's the place that you can actually become a real American by doing things as a foreigner and then turning into an American because you've come up with great ideas. Mm-hmm. Elon Musk, probably the greatest example.
Yeah.
Not from here, right?
Right. South Africa? Is that where he's
Yeah, it's like I met him at Coachella a bunch of years ago. Nobody was talking to him. It was really weird because it's just like rock stars backstage, everybody. And I see him and I walk up and I shake his hand and I go, I shouldn't have shook his hand because he just came out of the porta potty things, the executive porta potties. And I go, thanks for doing what you're doing. I said, I grew up in Detroit. I know Lee Iacocca, and I just what you're doing with shaking up the motor industry is phenomenal because you're forcing people into thinking what is your transportation? Why do you buy what you buy? When I was a kid growing up, everybody wanted those over-the-top power sleds. They wanted the sleepers, the cars that looked like they wouldn't do anything, and then you stomp on the gas and they burn rubber. And gas was 20 cents a gallon. But now look at this. We're dealing with a different world.
Plus, it's mega pollution and the countdown to climate change.
Well, see that, but back in those days, nobody cared. Yeah. Nobody knew about it. Nobody cared about it.
Nobody media didn't talk about it.
Exactly, because there was no reason for them to talk about it because it wasn't something that was going to kill us.
Yeah. The national narrative was more about escapism and other things.
Right. I wrote a song years ago when my friend
Secret Other Life.
I had I was in a band for a while, but I wrote a song years ago, but it was called "Whatever Happened to?" ? And it was all the things that we were afraid of when we were kids. Mm-hmm. Blasting caps.
Communism.
No, I'm talking about things that could actually affect you. Whatever happened to blasting caps? Do you remember blasting caps?
God, I don't remember that. I remember.
Sam, do you remember blasting caps?
I do.
Okay, Sam, tell me what you remember about blasting caps.
They were fun. I remember that kind of.
4th of July fireworks?
No, not those caps.
Okay.
I'm talking about blasting caps. I know you have the internet in that room, Sam, but look up blasting caps because they used to run these commercials all over, like PSAs, all over the country. If you see this, don't pick it up. This is a blasting cap.
Oh, like a grenade?
It's basically a small piece of TNT that they would use to set off the rest of the TNT.
Okay.
And they used them in mining operations. And apparently when they used them, these workers would basically leave them all over the place, but they could take your hand off. So if you lit the fuse of the blasting cap, it wasn't like a firecracker. It was basically a quarter stick. It was probably like a quarter stick of dynamite. But they would use it to set off the rest of the stuff. But they'd have these PSAs. So you'd be watching, Saturday morning cartoons. It's like, here's Bugs Bunny doing his thing. And all of a sudden it's like, kids, these are blasting caps. If you see them, don't pick them up. Don't get them near fire. Call your parents. Call the government. Call the president.
Yeah, I think I remember that.
And it was just like this. So it was like, whatever happened to blasting caps? It's like we were all afraid of these things.
Right.
We were afraid of
swine flu later on.
Well, all those things. Whatever happened to like avian flu? It's just like everybody's like it becomes front page news and then it all disappears. So anyway, this is not what you wanted to talk about.
It was going to be about music.
Sam, did you find out about the blasting caps?
But actually, getting back to music and radio. Those are. It seems like both those topics are overshadowed now, like on social media, with politics and other, like what stuff you're talking about. Seems like
Well,
that's the big deal in this century is not so much music, but it's politics and world, issues.
It's weird you bring that because yesterday somebody brought up the fact that and this is like it's hard to say without sounding like a complete jerk about this, but somebody said all country artists are right wingers. And
not all of them. Not Willie Nelson.
So exactly. So you know this, but everybody said, "Oh well." I said, first of all, number one, they're not really country artists. They are pop stars that have a slide guitar somewhere in the band, and they sing in those country harmonies. They're not country artists. Country artists that you and I grew up on, the Chris Christophersons of the world, the guys who
Johnny Cash,
the guys who rode the line between. They're basically writing songs that could be, told as stories. Johnny Cash. Willie Nelson, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Not
Waylon
all of
Jennings,
them.
my
Waylon
favorite.
Jennings. Not all of them were right wing. A lot of them were Republicans, but not full on, over the top, blindly supporting whatever it was.
That
Johnny
came late. That was the Reagan era more, I thought. The 80s.
Yeah, but you got to remember that's when the pop country thing started happening. Dwight Yoakam.
Right. I met Dwight. And he pulled me aside. He kicked out all the country people in his trailer to talk with me because at the time, Quad was top 40. And he wanted to get on top 40. So it was hilarious to hear him pitch his music to a top 40 music director after kicking out the country people from his trailer.
Because he knows where he's really going or where he should have gone to, which
Now, 91X, when you programmed it, you did play what? You mixed in, you'd sprinkle in Dwight, right?
Well, we had to. First of all, because this broadcast you're hearing comes out of Southern California, out of San Diego. And San Diego is known for artists like the Beat Farmers and Mojo Nixon. Mojo Nixon, not originally from San Diego. The Beat Farmers, kind of from San Diego, most of them, I believe.
STP.
And there were bands that played with that twang. Rank and File, who used to be called the Dills, lived in Carlsbad. They moved to L.A., and they were in that Up in Smoke movie. They moved to Austin, and they started doing Western music. Not country and Western, but just Western music. That's where their twangy thing came from. They were one of the greatest bands on the planet.
Yeah.
That
West
being
Coast
said...
swing.
The Bakersfield stuff, the West Coast country was always hipper, cooler,
more cowboy. Like
more cowboy, less, less Celtic.
Yeah.
Because you got to remember the most of the country music with the fiddles and the mandolins and the banjos and
Irish folk.
That was all Irish folk music that was basically played up in the hollers up in the Appalachians. So that being said, is that San Diego, to get to the point about Dwight Yoakam, San Diego was always the home of alt country. It started here.
Okay.
So when Dwight Yoakam moved from Ohio to the Valley, to move to the Valley, he became friends with Blasters, who twanged. He became friends with Los Lobos, who were basically a Mexican country band, if you will. And became friends with X. And as you know, they did the whole Knitters thing, which was a ripoff of the Weavers. So there was always super country roots in the alternative scene in San Diego. The whole cowpunk thing that took off was kind of because of what Rank and File did. But Rank and File moved to Austin before anybody knew how cool Austin was. So that being said, when I first met Dwight in '86 in Detroit, before I came to 91X, he came by. He was on Reprise Records because he wanted to be on the home of Jimi Hendrix and Neil Young.
He's a rocker.
He is, he grew up on rock and roll, so that's why his music sounded like it did. And it wasn't Nash Vegas as they call that Nashville stuff.
Was that also called outlaw country, or is that
different? No. Like he didn't want to be a part of the Nash Vegas stuff. He wanted to be what is now considered outlaw country.
Oh, okay.
Which is there's tons of other guys that are doing this stuff now.
Yeah. It's just outside of Nashville.
It's outside of Nashville, and it's done by guys who appreciate social distortion, who appreciate like hardcore rock bands, and they want to play country music the way it's supposed to be played, not the pop country stuff.
Right.
And that's the kind of thing. So Dwight, I originally played in Detroit, way back when he was opening up for like Loretta Lynn, and then when I moved to San Diego, I hadn't seen him in about a year and a half, maybe 2 years. And I get a phone call one day. It's a bizarre story. And my girlfriend at the time, now my wife, picks up the phone and goes, "Hey, Dwight Yoakam wants to talk to you." And I'm like, "Yeah, right. It's Dwight Yoakam." I pick up the phone and I go, "Hi, Dwight Yoakam." And hey, Mike, it's Dwight. I was like, hey, look, I know somebody is, this is a fake phone call. It's really not Dwight Yoakam. But if it is Dwight Yoakam, answer these 2 questions. I said, who did you open up for in Detroit back in '86, and where did you go afterwards? And there's this long pause, because in my mind, I'm thinking it's Peter Standish. Remember Peter Standish? Used to work at Reprise back in the day. Anyway, I'm thinking that Standish is either putting somebody on the phone because he knew I was a big Dwight Yoakam fan to fake me into thinking he was Dwight Yoakam. And so there's this pause on the other line, and the guy on the other end of the line is like, I opened up for Loretta Lynn, and I went to oh my God, I went to a Mexican restaurant with an alternative DJ. Was that you? And I'm like, yes. And at this point, I feel really unbelievably embarrassed because now I am messing with Dwight Yoakam, not realizing that it's actually him.
Right. Oh.
So at that point, Alex, he comes, he says, look, I always wondered what happened to you. Now that I know you're at 91X, and I was the MD at the time, music director at the time, and I said, why don't you come down and we'll do a show. So he was taking flying lessons. He flew down to the airport right over here, not Miramar, but the one south of there. Flew down with his pilot. They rented a car. They came to 91X's studio. We had him on there for 3 hours, playing Hendrix, playing the Blasters, Los Lobos. He was the guest DJ, and he also plugged in an acoustic guitar. We had him singing songs live on the air, and me and my buddy Tom.
I brought one of those.
Oh, you did? Well, that was the thing. We actually had him playing guitar on there, singing his songs and stuff. And that's the thing. He is a country artist, but he's a country artist in the way that they used to be.
Yeah.
Back in the day, and that's the thing that
edgier sound, kind of a rockish.
Well, it's kind of like it would be the hip hop / rap of the Cowboys, because the Cowboys were basically telling stories, right.
Oh, I'm glad you brought up hip hop. I want to transition into that because you did a recent little seminar with young children about hip hop. I want to talk.
I do that every single year.
Do you? Okay.
Yeah, every single.
But finishing up with Dwight, anything else you want to say about Dwight?
Well, I just want to say that the thing about it is like good storytellers, whether it's Rage Against the Machine, educating you about things, or Bruce Springsteen educating you about things. It's like if you look at what it is about rock music and alternative and what it's supposed to, which direction it's supposed to lead in. Is it leaning in the left direction as far as open-minded and liberalism, whatever you want to, whatever liberal means?
That'd be my pick.
Yeah. So the thing is that that's the whole thing about rock and roll. Rock and roll has always been anti-establishment.
Yeah.
When Neil Young wrote Ohio one day after the incident at Kent State, it was on the radio within 5 days. That will never happen anymore.
Right.
Because of the corporate control of radio stations. So the thing about the Dwight Yoakams of the world is I appreciate the fact that they write these songs about something that, there's stories.
Real life stories.
And that's what hip hop was. Hip hop was the punk rock of the ghetto.
Yeah.
It was bringing people who lived in certain neighborhoods. They're like, oh, wait a minute, that happens in your neighborhood too? I mean, one of the opening lines of Grandmaster Flash's song, The Message, is people pissing on the streets, they just don't care. It's like, that was New York in the 80s. Mm-hmm. But people don't think like, oh, that could be a country song. It could be anything. You're just describing what's happening in your neighborhood. And the neighborhood of country was cowboys out in the middle of nowhere with an acoustic guitar telling the stories about, like, I want to get back to the city and find the love of my life, and where's my pickup truck, and where's my dog?
Right. Melodic storytelling.
Yes.
My favorite kind of music, actually. That's what made the Beatles famous, I thought.
Exactly.
But Bob Dylan as well. I mean, you could start naming off all the greatest artists in history, and that's what they did.
Right.
Melodic, artistic storytelling.
And the crazy thing is you're going to say about the hip-hop thing is that when Dylan was doing Johnny's on the Pavement, mixing up the medicine, that was basically a scat, like almost like a hip hop song with a different cadence to it. Mm-hmm. Dylan was pushing that, word speak, spitting words at you.
Right.
Like a lot of hip hop guys do now. And some of them have completely different cadences than Dylan did.
Subterranean Homesick Blues. Right. One of my favorite Dylan songs.
Or things like, besides Subterranean Homesick Blues, you can have the concept of you could actually take those words over the beats of something else, but it would be super syncopated compared to the Dr. Seuss stuff, which is what you're talking about.
Right. You're teaching the kids that Dr. Seuss, who I guess taught at UCSD, right?
There's a library named after him at UCSD. He lived on top of the hill in La Jolla. He also had a beach house down there. I never met him. When I first moved here, he was still alive.
Right. Yeah, you met Lee Iacocca.
I met Lee Iacocca, but I never met
Dr.
I never met Dr. Seuss. Well, Lee Iacocca I knew because he lived in Detroit, lived in Bloomfield Hills, and he had two kids, Kathy and Leah. His two daughters. Kathy's slightly older than me, Leah slightly younger than me. And his daughters had nobody to play with because Lee was making so much money that he moved to Bloomfield Hills, which was the old money of Detroit. So these people had big mansions, and their kids were all in their 20s or 30s at this point. So the executives who worked at Ford or GM or Chrysler, if they lived in Bloomfield Hills, they had mansions. And I do mean big mansions. Lee's house was phenomenal. But his kid had nobody in the neighborhood to go play with. So every Saturday morning, Lee Iacocca used to throw the kids in the back of whatever Ford he was driving at the time, bring them down, knock on my front door, and I'd answer the door. He was just Mr. Iacocca to me. I did not realize who he was until years later. I'd open the door and go, Mr. Iacocca, hey, can you look after the girls for a while? Yeah, sure. So Kathy and Lee used to go flying in. I had two sisters at the time who lived at the house, and my little brother, I think, was probably not even born yet. Because this is before the Mustang became the thing. And he was born my brother was born in 64. And the Mustang came out in 64 and a half. So Lee was working on that whole Mustang thing. So every Saturday he was down at the office, working with his Ford crew. And then like 4 or 5 o'clock in the afternoon, he'd come back and knock on the door. And he and I would go running to the houses across the street to go find his two kids, which generally at that point had been in 15 people's basements because that's where you spent your Saturdays in Michigan in those days.
Cold weather.
Yeah, because either that or it was too hot outside, or too sweltering with the humidity. But that's how I knew him. So, it wasn't like I was living at his house. I had been to his house a bunch of times in the old days. But he's just he's just a simple, normal dude that just pays attention to people. And that's in essence, not only the Mustang, but he brought back the Jeep CJ, which they eventually called the Wrangler, and still to this day, I parked next to one earlier today. They're probably one of the most popular cars in America, and that car was pretty much going to be gone until he resurrected it. He also did weird things, the K car, which is horrible, but the Jeep.
Did he come? How long did he serve there?
He was at Ford for, I'm sure it's on the interwebs if people want to look it up, but he was there at least through, I think, some of the majority of the 60s. I think he went to do the K car thing in the I know he ran for
president, sort of, kind of.
I don't remember him doing that because it was probably when I was living in England.
His name circulated as a candidate for a while.
Probably
in the
because
80s, I think.
Because he saved Chrysler at one point.
Yeah.
Because Chrysler was on the verge of bankruptcy.
And
by the way, at the same time, people don't realize this. At the same time, Mitt Romney's dad was running American Motors, which is also in the hood.
Was that after he was a senator or before?
After Mitt was a senator? I think
after George Romney was
I don't remember that. I don't remember that. I just remember that American Motors, because they seemed like the new company. They were like the... how do you describe this? They were like the
Tesla Motors.
Well, no, imagine how Geico's commercials are just the weirdest commercials on the planet, and now they're showing the old ones, like the flashback to the it's not like the Geico frog anymore. It's like the caveman thing. The caveman thing was weird.
I remember that.
American Motors was the caveman commercial stuff because they came out with the Gremlin and the Pacer almost at the same time.
Oh, that Pacer was a bomb.
Exactly.
That was a trash, man.
It was, but the weird thing about it was their attempt to go look, we can make a weird looking car like the Volkswagen Bug, because the Volkswagen Bug was revolutionary because it was ancient design, air cooled engine, rear engine, if you will. So when the Pacer came out, it was like, look, this is like a car of the future.
It looked kind of weird, like a spaceship.
It was weird, but it was like somebody took a Gremlin and shoved an air hose up its exhaust pipe, and it went, and it just kind of like turned into like an egg shaped thing. But they did have some, they had the Javelin for a while. They had the Gremlin. They had a few cool cars, and then that's when they had Jeep at one point, and they lost Jeep, and that's when Chrysler picked it up. Because Jeep was made in Toledo, down the freeway from Detroit. Yeah. So, back to music?
Yeah. Back to Dr. Seuss.
So, Dr. Seuss.
Which will get us back to music.
Okay, so Dr. Seuss grew up. I shouldn't say grew up. He moved out here. I think it was from Chicago originally. He was doing tons and tons of ad campaigns and stuff. And when he started writing his children's books, I started to think right after he died, I was kind of like, wow, this is totally crazy. I wanted to do a tribute CD, and I was going to contact friends of mine to do it. And one of the first guys I talked to was Michael Franti. Now he's in Spearhead, but back then he was in Disposable Heroes of Hypocrisy.
One of my favorite
that band
bands ever. Yeah. Television, the drug of the nation.
Exactly. One of the most intense bands you'd ever want to see live. I just love them. I'd love them to get back together and do one show. But anyway, make a longer story longer. The Michael Franti, I got on the phone with him. I said, look, I want to do this. And I think he would be great for Green Eggs and Ham. I think he would be the antagonist in the story. And then the other guy would be the one who's like, the guy who's being antagonized. He's going like, I do not like them, Sam. I am. Leave me be. And it's like, so the Sam part would be Michael Franti. And the person who's being antagonized would be Tony Bennett, because Tony Bennett basically does scat still. He does that kind of like, I do not like them, Sam, I am.
Cab Calloway.
Yeah, Cab Calloway stuff, but Tony Bennett's, Cab Calloway's long since died, unfortunately. Yeah. But that would be the cool part. That would be the cool part. Do you have to do a break here?
Oh, we don't do any breaks in this
good.
show. Good. Forget about the rules of radio.
All right. So my question for you is, could you imagine Michael Franti being the antagonist?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Would you eat them in a tree? Would you eat them with a bee? Like all these, because it's such one of the most amazing stories. And so I asked Michael Franti, I go, what do you think? And he goes, I'll do it. And I go, that didn't take long. And he goes, I have to do it. And I go, why do you have to do it? And he goes, because if it wasn't for Dr. Seuss, I wouldn't know how to rhyme. And that's what you find out. Most hip-hop
kids say that, right? Run
most
DMC
hip-hop kids
said that, right?
Yeah, they learned how to rhyme through the Dr. Seuss. Obviously, it was the cadence that he was using. It was pretty simple. But early hip-hop, when you think about early hip-hop, it was all about the simplicity. It wasn't until, DOS Effects and these guys who came up with the super over-the-top, backbeat, rhyme the middle word, not the end of the sentence.
Right.
All these guys like the Eminems. I mean, Eminem just basically took the whole thing and flipped it on its side and said, no, I'm going to rhyme things in the middle of the word, not the middle of the, so the middle part of the word is going to rhyme. And after a while,
make up words to make them rhyme.
Well, no, because you still understand what he's saying. Yeah, like orange, dorange, nobody ever thinks that.
I saw his interview on 60 Minutes when he talked about that.
Right. But that's an old English joke. It's like, what rhymes with orange?
Yeah.
Dorange. Because in England, it's like, it's a dorange, isn't it? It's like door hinge. I mean, the way Americans say it doesn't come across the same way.
Right.
But English
people. How long
people
were you on the air in England?
I was never. I'll put it this way. I was on the air only on. I was on the air once a week on the BBC. I did a thing called. It was called Beverly Hills Jock. Bizarre story, but I went over to do. The Cure did a pirate radio broadcast originally before XFM started, and it was started by The Cure at their offices in whatever street their offices were on. But they flew myself and Louis Largent over to do the first broadcast, and I was setting up the equipment and doing stuff, and we were basically trying to get the transmitter working. It went on like an hour and a half, 2 hours late, and while I was doing this broadcast, my sister was working for the BBC. I couldn't tell her I was in town because it was an illegal broadcast. All of these bizarre things are happening. It was a pirate broadcast, exactly. So when it went on the air, because they kind of leaked that out in the paper to look for it up and down the radio dial. This is back in the days where there was no social media. So we did this broadcast. We flew back to the U.S. Lewis went back to K-Rock. I went back to San Diego, back here to San Diego. And then I get a phone call from my sister, who was working. They said the Radio 1 people, Jackie Brambles, did this midday show. They were looking for somebody to do gossip for the BBC, American gossip for the BBC. And I said, I'll ask Lewis, because Lewis, as you know, was like living in L.A., the gossip central of the world. This is pre-TMZ, pre any of this stuff, but the English were fascinated by film gossip and Hollywood gossip. And they wanted to call it Beverly Hills Jock, as opposed to Beverly Hills Cop, because Beverly Hills Cop had been a huge movie. Yeah. So they talked to me, and I go, great, I'll get Lewis to do it. talk to Lewis. Lewis sets the whole deal up, forgets that he's flying to London the first day he's supposed to do the broadcast. So he's actually had flown to England. He was actually sleeping, apparently, in England at Heathrow Airport when they're trying to get a hold of him in the U.S., and this is before cell phones. So he's not on the air, and so they call me, and they go, Lewis is I said, he's in London. And they go, like, what do you mean he's in London? I said, yeah, he's like probably flying back to the States or something like that. And they go, well, can you do the first one then? And I'm like, when are you on? They go, and in an hour. And this is like 3 o'clock in the morning because it's, in England time, we're going to go like noon or something. And we're going on in an hour. And I go, okay. I get out of bed. I go down to the 7-Eleven. I buy the National Enquirer. How stupid is that? Wow. And I come back and I do the first report.
That's where a lot of radio content comes from.
Right, exactly. I do the first report, but I also had found out, and this is like the weird part, I'd also find out, because I talked to a friend of mine who you remember, Kim White.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And apparently,
hi, Kim. She might be
exactly.
listening.
And Kim White had told me that apparently Sting had been at Tower Records earlier that day. Sting was buying CDs, and he put his credit card down. When he puts his credit card down, the credit card gets declined. And Sting's really embarrassed by this, so he pulls out another credit card. And he goes, oh, there's just my accountant.
No, Sting,
Second
you're broke.
one.
You're broke, Sting.
Well, this is the thing. It's like second credit card got done, that one got declined, third credit card got declined. So Sting walks out of there without any CDs. He bought like probably $400 worth of CDs because he was going on tour or whatever. Oh, so man. I report this story on the BBC that Sting had been, his credit card was denied 3 times. Sting's publicist in England hears about it and goes, what's going on? Contacts Sting. Sting goes, I don't know. It turns out that Sting's accountant had been ripping him off for years.
Oh, man.
And he found out.
And he fired him, right?
Well, this is the thing. The guy had absconded with all of his money and basically fired himself and left with millions of dollars worth of Sting's money.
Wow.
But Sting didn't realize what was happening, but it got reported on the BBC. And so I get a phone call the next day, and they go, hey.
That's before Miles Copeland, obviously, right?
No, this is way after. This is like this is in the early 90s.
Oh, okay.
This is in the.
I thought Miles managed Sting all along.
No, not as accountant, not a manager, but an accountant.
Okay.
So there's always a huge difference. You have an accountant and you have a manager.
Right.
The manager tries to hire you the best accountant in the world, and your accountant is not supposed to screw you over.
Right.
So when he got screwed over and he found out about it because it was embarrassing and it was all over the BBC, I got a call the next day from Jackie Bramble's producer, this guy called Jonathan Ruffle. Jonathan says to me, he goes, look, we talked to Lewis, but we want you to do it because that story was huge. Nobody knew about it. We basically broke the story. And I'm like, about Sting? And I'm like, yeah. So apparently they were like, okay, can you do it? So I started doing it for like 2.5 years. I think I did this reporting. Like every week they would call me up at like 3 o'clock in the morning. I would sit there, pour over my notes, but I broke the story about, which they got really upset about, by the way. Paul McCartney, Linda was still alive. They were going to go play Milwaukee Stadium, Milwaukee County Stadium. Mm-hmm. I mean, you're familiar with how Milwaukee's run on what?
Isn't
Sausages?
That where the Brewers play?
It is where when the Packers come down, they play there.
Okay.
It's the football stadium.
They still split games?
I don't know. I know they got a stadium up. They got a stadium up.
They still play at Lambeau.
Lambeau, right? But Lambeau's up in Green Bay. They also have one in Milwaukee. They play at every once in a while.
But I thought that was just for baseball.
I don't know. But whatever it was, McCartney was going to be playing there. Yeah. Linda comes in and basically tells them all that all their German ancestry of Milwaukee, all the brewery, that can stay. Mm-hmm. No sausages, no meat to be sold in the whole place. I mean, can you imagine going into like the meat capital of the world and telling them the day of that you cannot sell one meat product in the place? And of course, everybody in Milwaukee got pissed off. Right. I find out about it.
The meat capital of the world.
It is. I mean, when you think about it, the sausages.
Burger capital of the world. Burger and beer.
Yeah, but
and
the Germans make sausages, right? So that was the bratwurst, the notwurst, all that stuff. So they basically told him, no, you can't sell any meat. So, of course, everybody in Milwaukee's like, this is stupid. This is ridiculous. So Paul McCartney's wife, not just Paul McCartney, but his wife is basically saying we can't sell any meat. So they got pissed. I reported the story. This is my favorite part about the British. I report the story, and I would never tell them what I was going to report on before it happened. Mm-hmm. And at the time, it was just kind of like, oh, okay. And they kind of like, I could tell that there was like, it was just kind of weird for them to hear this coming out of my mouth. So I hang up the phone. 2 hours later, I get a phone call. Paul McCartney's office called, and apparently they're really upset because the BBC has this deal with Paul McCartney that they will never report any bad news about Paul McCartney.
Oh, really? I
So,
could see that.
so they basically told me be very careful in the future because I also brought up something about Give Ireland Back to the Irish. Remember that song that you did back in the days that was banned by the BBC?
Great political song.
Exactly.
That changed the world, actually.
And then the one that basically made everybody freak out was the reason that I really kind of kept the job there was because I'd heard a story about, this is right around the time, do you remember the Pope? The picture of the Pope or the American flag was up, and Sinead O'Connor ripped it down or something. So she was
that ended her career, right?
Well, here's the weird thing about it. She had gone to a what's it called, Mrs. Gooch's. It's now Whole Foods, but up in LA it's called Mrs. Gooch's. She'd gone in there, and she was walking by the meat department. Back to meat again. She's walking by the meat department. It's like halfway past the meat department, and the guy behind the counter starts going. He starts singing the Star Spangled Banner. Oh, sorry, because she wanted the flag removed at that show in Philadelphia or whatever it was, right?
Right.
And so that news made it out that Sinead O'Connor didn't want the American flag up. So this guy starts singing the song, singing the Star Spangled Banner to piss her off. She complained to the manager, and the manager fired the guy. So the guy loses his job. She has no idea that the guy's lost his job. All she knows is that she complained to the manager, says, that guy shouldn't do that because I'm a paying customer, because she was living in L.A. at the time. I hear the story about it because, of my friends in the music business. I reported on the BBC. The publicist for Sinead in England hears about it, calls Sinead and says, do you know what happened to that guy? She goes, no, I just complained to the manager, said he shouldn't do that. I said, well, they fired him. So she goes in the next day and says, no, you got to give him his job back. You should reprimand him. Don't fire. I didn't say fire the guy. Just reprimand him and tell him that this is uncool.
Right.
So he gets his job back because her publicist in England hears about this story on the BBC, not even knowing that it's happened, right?
Yeah.
And because the guy lost his job, and that's the thing. I think he lost his job, and whoever the manager was knew somebody that I knew in the music business. So at the end of the day, it's those things where you report something, it affects something here, and then 3,000, 6,000 miles away, something else goes crazy. But they were like, oh, my God, where are you getting all these stories from? It's like you and I both know. How many people do we know in the music business that run into celebrities all the time?
Right. At restaurants or bars or Troubadour in L.A., Whiskey A Go-Go, all those places people kind of hang out.
They're there, and you see them, and you run into them, and they do something weird, and you report on it. And, So this is all pre-TMZ and all that stuff. So to answer your question, I was not working on the radio in England except for the Cure broadcast, and then the BBC I did for like 2.5 years as the gossip columnist for BBC Radio 1.
But if we stand back and look at the bigger career of Mike Halloran, you were at 91X how many years? Like you were there.
I got there in 86.
3 times, right?
Yeah, I got there in 86. I left to go to K-Rock in 88. I came back in 89. 89 to 96, that's when J-Core / soon-to-be Clear Channel.
Merger Mania
happened. So I took off in 96. I came back there about 8 years ago and left about 2 years ago. And now I'm programming a bilingual radio station in Tijuana.
Right. Now, I've seen your posts on Facebook about it. Talk about that for a minute.
It's the odd thing about it is, I mean, because you've been living in Southern California for a long time. This market,
I moved here in 2014.
2014,
Yeah.
but you know about Southern California.
Yeah.
And when you're in Sacto, it's the same thing. The same thing in Sacramento. There are many bilingual people.
Yeah.
And the bilingualism generally goes one way. People who speak Spanish generally learn English better than we learn Spanish. Mm-hmm. So when you live in Southern California and you work on 91X, which is a station that is based out of TJ, and I worked with Mexican guys there that learned how to speak English through American rock and roll or British rock and roll. My buddy Rafa would come in, he would bring in an album by Deep Purple. He would drop the needle and he'd go, what is he saying here? And I'd have to translate, the gibberish that was happening in English rock and roll to tell him what it is. And it's always the innuendo they don't understand.
Oh, right.
Because the innuendo doesn't translate in rock and roll. So when somebody says something and you're like, what does he mean by that? It's like it's generally sex. That's generally what it comes
that's what
down
rock
to.
and roll means, sex.
It is.
That's the R&B term from the 30s or 40s.
Baby, you want to rock and roll. It's like jump in the bed and you're going to rock and roll with me. You're going to have sex.
It was more than a euphemism.
Right. So the sex music, if you will, that we all grew up on, they meaning the Spanish speakers in the audience, whether they lived on this side of the border or that side of the border, they learned a lot about English through that stuff. And as I've learned since I was working across the border in Mexico when I first got here in '86 all the way through like 1990, that the Mexicans have a better sense of humor than anybody. They really do. They have a very, very, very high level of puns and the example I can give you, which is just it's the thing that happened to me when my girlfriend at the time, now the wife, came down there for the first time. We're going to go take Raphael out to grab some lobster burritos down in Puerto Nuevo. So as I show up and I get out of the car and he sees Stephanie for the first time, he goes, "Ay, cuñado." And I'm like, "What did you say?" And he goes, I'll tell you on Monday." And I'm like, "Okay, what was that coon word you called me?" And he says, It's cuñado. And the literal translation is brother-in-law. But the intention is, like if I walk in and I see your sister and I say cuñado, it basically means I want to marry your sister. So it's one level above, it's the inference of what it is.
Right.
Or if I meet...
There's no mistaking that as humor, right?
Well, the thing is, it depends on who you say it to.
Context, too.
If you say it to somebody you don't know, they might take offense to it. I say it all the time to every cop that ever pulls me over in TJ. I will look at that, and they will look at me like, "What?" And I'm like, "Come on, man!" And like suddenly they will laugh and realize that that's the glorious joy of the language, the barrier. And there's many things. Cabron, which is everything that means ASSHOLE. It's actually a goat. Cabron is basically, but that's the dudes who act like goats are the ones that are constantly butting into you and going through your pockets, and how goats act, right? And the term pinche, which Pinche with I believe there's an accent in there. Pinche is the guy who works in the kitchen who basically is like the sous chef. He's the guy who's basically doing the pre-prep work and cleaning the dishes, like a kitchen boy. That's basically what it is. So when somebody says pinche cabron, they really mean that guy's a effing ass beep, whatever, right? That's what they mean.
By the way, Michael, you can say fuck.
I'm not going to say fuck.
You can say whatever you want.
I'm not going to say fuck on the radio. But the whole point is,
radio.
As opposed to saying
version.
That guy's a fucking asshole. Pinche cabron actually means kitchen boy goat, which is to me more clever. Like when you call somebody, "Don't be a dick." It's like you know the term dick as far as penis or whatever it is, but at the same time, it's like a dick is somebody. Why are you being such a dick? You're not
like Led Zeppelin said. Sometimes words have two meanings.
Yeah. I don't think they were talking about dick at that point.
We can get into all kinds of stuff with you because you've done so much. But didn't you interview Robert Plant?
I did.
About the song Jamaica, or how do you say it?
Well, it's funny you bring that up because that's one of those things that it keeps popping up. And the reason it pops up is because years and years and years ago, 1973, that song came out.
Yeah.
D''YER, new word, MAKER. It came out on Houses of the Holy. Mm-hmm. It got played on the radio in Detroit, and all these Detroit DJs would get on the air and they would go, "Hey, everybody, that's Dire Maker from Led Zeppelin, from Houses of the Holy, everybody, blah, blah."
Or how about Deer Maker?
Well, the thing is that I kept listening to this, and because I was going to school in England at the time, the running joke that we knew was how you pronounce DYER is J, did you, Jamaica.
Yeah.
And the running joke is, "Oh, my wife went on holiday. Jamaica? No, she went on her own accord."
Okay, now I
So
get
the
that
joke is, did you make her?
Okay.
Jamaica?
Yeah.
Like, she went on holiday. Did you make her?
Yeah.
Jamaica. So
Yet it's to a Jamaican beat, too.
well, the thing is, it's a reggae riff.
How cool.
It's a reggae riff, but they actually were taking lyrics and the melody. The chord structure is from Rosie and the Originals. I can't. What's the Rosie and the Original song that they ripped it off of? Baby.
I don't know.
What's
Baby, it's you? No.
No, it's like. By the way, Rosie from Rosie Originals grew up here in San Diego. I tried to get Rosie on the phone with Robert Plant at the time. If you look that up for me, Sam, it's Rosie in the original. It's like.
She lived a long time, right?
She did. She moved to Texas.
Yeah.
She died reasonably recently, I think. But
Yeah.
I was
Okay,
trying to.
Google Rosie and the Originals.
But what was the song?
Why? Hopefully it'll tell me.
Jamaica. DYE. They ripped off. It's Angel Bing Bing. It was that riff, I believe.
I consider myself like a musicologist who knows a lot about music from way back, but I don't know the answer to that.
I think it's Angel Baby.
Oh, that sounds right.
That's a hit. That was a
Angel
big
Baby,
hit.
I believe it is because
Okay.
it was the chord pattern that Jimmy Page took.
Okay.
You know. So Angel Baby. I think that was it. I'm not positive, but so anyway, the first time I got the chance to interview Robert Plant, he was on a phone. He was driving from L.A. with Jimmy Page in the car south from L.A. to play the sports unit when it was the Page and Plant thing. Mm-hmm. That's when the guitar player
I saw that
Paul
in
Thompson, the Cure's guitar player Paul Thompson was playing with him,
Mm-hmm.
and so they said Robert Plant's going to call and do an interview, and I was on 91X at the time. So I went, great. I said I need to ask him one question. That's all I wanted to ask him. So I want to get it on tape to stop this maniacal problem with American DJs saying the wrong title. So I get him on the phone, and the first thing I ask him is, and the funny thing is, it was on tape. It sat at 91X forever until somebody from J-Court erased it. But I asked him the question. Go, Robert Plant. First question out of my mouth is probably the last question I ever get to ask you. Please explain to every American the reggae song on Houses of the Holy. How do you pronounce it? He goes, oh, Jamaica. And I go, yes. Can you explain why? And he did on tape. So I had this.
Oh,
and this
that's
is all
classic.
This is
man.
all pre-Wikipedia.
Yeah.
Right? And so I'm going to keep this. So every time somebody does this, we'll have this on tape so that nobody can question it ever again. J-Core erased it. So the
Germania again.
So they erased it. Guess what happens? Robert Plant comes in 15 years later. Hadn't done virtually any in-studio interviews since then. So I asked him, I go, right off the bat, I go, you got to tell me what it is. So that is now, if you go on Wikipedia, that is it's the quote from Robert Plant on my radio show in whatever it was. And the same thing with Josh Homme.
That's historic stuff.
Josh Homme, right? Mm-hmm. In America, it's Homme. Why is it Homme? I don't know. It's a French word for man. It's Homme is You know, je suis un homme. That's what it's supposed to be. I'm a man, right?
Mm-hmm.
Josh But that's what they call him in Europe, Josh In America, it's Homme for some bizarre reason. So if you go to Wikipedia for Josh Homme's pronunciation of his name, it's on there as well. Because I always try to make sure that people understand that sometimes you may be mispronouncing.
Yeah, I know. Like a lot of people, comedians, far left-wing comedians are mispronouncing Kamala Harris. They're calling her Kamala Harris, and it's making me ill.
Yes.
So,
well,
but anyway,
but nobody has.
She's not necessarily my pick. I'm a Bernie freak, but I mean,
right.
I respect.
But let me
her
ask you
enough.
this: if you find out that let's say your name was Alex because it was you were part Ukrainian or something like that, and that's the way. After a while, you just kind of give up, and you're like, whatever, they're going to just say it. So Kamala Harris or Kamala, depending on where you throw the accent. Where does her name come from, by the way? Is it
it's a Jamaican name.
Is?
Yeah. Well, she's half Jamaican, half Indian.
Interesting.
Yeah. And of course, Jamaican at one time was controlled by the UK till what, 60?
I think it's got its
60s.
independence, but they're still very, very much influenced by them.
Yeah.
So
I got a million questions for you, but
I'm distracted.
We got 10 minutes left or something like that. But I better say a shout out to my good buddy out there in San Diego, Lando Martinez of the band Hocus.
Lando, by the way, one of my favorite human beings on the whole planet because he's a lefty.
Yeah, I'm a lefty too.
Are you? You play guitar lefty?
Yeah, well, that guitar I play right-handed. They forced me to learn right-handed when I was a kid, but I'm a left-handed
We had this
guy.
discussion kind of online the other day, didn't we?
Yeah.
Because I always think that if you are picking up a guitar and your left hand is on the fretboard, that should be left-handed. Because that's the hand that does the most intricate work.
Yeah, it's perspective. I mean, but the hand that drives the rhythm, it should be your good hand, I think.
But why?
Well, just maybe I'm just
How do you bat?
Maybe.
If
Funny. I bat right-handed. I shoot pool left-handed. I bowl right-handed. So I'm ambidextrous.
Yeah. Well, see. This is what I'm going to ask you. I'm a lefty. I write left. I was never forced into writing with my right hand. Most of my friends at school in England who were left-handed were forced into writing right, and they had horrible penmanship because my most dexterous hand is my left hand. But when I go to play baseball, this is my power hand. This is basically just the right hand does one thing, which is push the bat. The left hand aims it. It's the one that can basically get it to go up or down or whatever it is, because that's where you're getting your fulcrums in your right hand. Same thing with golf. So I golf right-handed, but to me, I consider that left-handed because same thing. Your power is coming from your right side, and that's with the strumming hand, unless you're an amazing picker. And then if you're a really good guitar player.
Mark Knopfler is my hero, by the way.
Well, is he left-handed originally, and he's
no, he's right-handed, I think.
Positive?
I don't know. But he plays with his fingers instead of a pick.
But there was somebody online the other day who I can't remember who it was. Oh, I know who it was. The guy who designs the Jaguars. His name is Wayne, and Wayne, I met him at the Cult came into town. He's friends with the Cult, and he's a right-handed guitar player that's left-handed, and he's a designer.
Okay.
He just actually went to work for Lotus cars, but he designed all these Jaguars over the last 5, 10, 15 years or whatever it is. And I saw that he was left-handed. He was like signing something with his left hand. I thought, oh my God, that makes sense to me because he's a right-handed guitar player, but he's a left-handed person. So you think you were forced into playing right-handed?
Well, I think I tell myself that, but the truth is, I've tried to go back to left-handed strumming, but I can't do that anymore. Now that it's the opposite problem. Now my left hand's the noodle, but it can. You're right. You need to use both sides of your brain to really be good at this.
Yeah, but at the same time, if one hand is doing the minimal amount of work.
Yes.
Picking, you know what I mean. You can learn how to pick with your right hand.
Yeah.
But learning how to,
I'm good now on guitar. I'm not awesome and advanced. I'm more in the intermediate area. But I've learned a lot of Beatles songs and cool 90s alternatives. I could play Interstate Love Song. And, I love the basic rock and roll stuff.
So when you look at somebody like Paul McCartney, right, and he's left-handed.
Yeah.
Does he write left-handed?
That's a good question.
I don't know if he does or not. To me, it's always just.
I think when you're on that level, and I think his talent is more in songwriting, at least in the Beatle era and Wings era.
Right.
That came from the right side of his brain, which is the left hand. I think that he was a right brain type guy more than a left brain guy, whereas Lennon, the right-handed guy, was kind of the opposite. He was more the thinker,
right?
Using the
creative side of his brain.
Yeah, the creative and the analytical together. Like he had it all. He mixed it. He's the bigger picture in my world.
But the truth to me is, you do need, especially in bands like the Beatles or XTC or the bands that have the two songwriters, you need both sides of those things. You need the weirdo, the freaky guy who basically does bizarre things.
Yeah.
And that would have been the Lennon. Mm-hmm. And then you have McCartney, who writes these brilliant little pop songs. But when they were writing songs together, it was like Paul would come up with these, I have to admit it's getting better. And then Lennon's like, it can't get much worse. It's right. There's always the
antithesis.
Exactly. He was the antithesis of everything that McCartney was like happy about.
But it worked well together as a blend. And what's amazing is no one really went after that model to do what the Beatles did after them, right? Everyone went.
I am sure, Alex, there's probably a million bands if we went back and looked, but they never made it.
Yes, that's what I mean.
So we don't know about them, but I'm sure there's lots of bands that said we should do this. XTC, to me, was the closest thing to the Beatles.
Yeah. I loved them. In fact, that was one of my best interviews. That was just, they're brilliant.
Was it after they decided to stop touring or before?
Oh, it was after they stopped touring. This was 92 when Peter Pumpkinhead was out.
Right.
But anyway, you brought up the Police earlier. You're mostly talking about Sting, but I'm just curious. Stuart Copeland has lived in San Diego, right? Does he still live here?
I don't know if he's ever lived here.
I've seen him in a video saying he has lived here and loves it here.
Really?
Because he's a surfer.
Interesting.
And you know that the Copelands
generally-
are from America, right? They're
Yeah. Well, I mean, when you say they're from America, their parents were involved in the government.
CIA.
But I don't think that they necessarily lived here. I think they
No.
lived in a lot of places.
Miles was born in Alabama.
Oh, I did not know
Yeah,
that.
Stewart might have been born overseas, but he considers himself an American.
Right. Yeah, he always was.
Yeah.
And it was his band, the Police.
Right.
I mean, I
Right.
remember meeting them on the second tour, I think it was. Yeah, it was the second tour.
79 around then.
I'd have to go look up the dates, on the gigography thing, but they played the same club. They played a place called Bookies in Detroit, and they went out and played a place called the Center Stage. They came back and played Bookies again because they hated the Center Stage. So they came back, and I interviewed them on that tour. And it was like November. It was freezing outside, and they blew off the interview that night. I had to meet them at the hotel in the morning, and they had just released Regatta, the second album.
Right.
So whenever it was, right around then. But what was trippy is that I had no idea that he lived here. And if he did, how come we haven't run into him? That's the question. How come we haven't run into him?
That's a good question. I've just seen him in the video saying this, and
Where you'll have to show that to me.
Okay, I'll send you a link
when we get off.
Yeah.
Send me a link.
Yeah, that's what it's all about these days. Facebook, last century was about radio, what we did. One person talking to 500,000 people.
Right.
This century is about
50 million people talking to 4 people.
Yeah, exactly. All right. Hey, where's the background music? Usually a song kicks in 3 minutes when that's a signal that we have 3 minutes left.
Oh, yeah, let me get that on.
Yeah.
Well, now you've got, no, because you don't have 3 minutes left. You still got.
Yeah, that's like Green Day. Billy Joe at a iHeart show was, I got 1 minute left. Oh, now I got nothing.
Yeah,
Just
that was a very
Justin
trippy.
Bieber.
That was a very trippy scene, wasn't it?
So we're going to be wrapping this up in the next couple minutes. What did we not talk? We did mention Max Tolkoff, did we? You do a show with him, right?
Well, I haven't even started it yet. We're going to start it today or tomorrow.
Okay.
And when you talked to me, I said I would just blow him off till tomorrow.
Yeah. Now, he was programming 91X before you were, right?
He was. He brought me in from Detroit. He hired me to come out from Detroit.
It was Meatball your nickname?
No, Billy Bones gave me that nickname.
Oh, okay.
And it was originally Oz used to call me the pit bull of radio because I would just get something, I would just never give up on it. Mm-hmm. Since I got my teeth into something, I would never give up on it. So Billy came up with that nickname out of pit bull and meatball and you know what? You should have Billy Bones on here one day.
When I heard you on the air here in town a few years ago, you were just calling yourself Mike. Is that what you called yourself all along?
No, the funny thing is I've never really used the term Mike on the radio. Really? 2 reasons. Number one, because, Mike is so close to microphone, right?
Right.
And then here in San Diego, there's this guy, Mikey, that came along and used that term. And, so I was actually, before I kept using my real last name, which is Halloran, originally I was going to use, I was going to be the voice of reason. I was going to be Michael Reason because of, this